Well, it's a Friday night.
How are you?
How are you doing?
All right.
Good.
Is there hope for somebody as old as me?
There is hope. I can tell you the story about the couple that had already been married 68 years when they came in my office.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
Okay, well, they wanted to work on it.
She personally knew Ronald Reagan. She's probably passed away by now. That was about 15 years ago.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll be married 50 years this August.
This August is your 50, the big 50.
Yeah.
That's awesome. You'll be eligible for my interview for those who have been married 50 years.
Oh, is that right?
I have this fantasy. I'm going to write a book with 50 couples.
Why not? That sounds cool.
I've already done half a dozen interviews. I've had it past, 2 of them have been patriarchs.
Okay.
The ones I've done so far are friends I had in the temple that were sealers.
That sounds like a good plan.
Yeah. All right. So it's good to be here and grateful that you could be here. And so there's the story told of a man that it was a snowy day, like it's snowy outside tonight here where I'm at. And it was a very snowy, wintry day. And it was so cold that just nobody went out. But it was Sunday and the preacher was there. And the one guy, he came to church and he said, "Hey, well, I have a sermon prepared. Do you want me to give my sermon?" And the guy says, "Well, if I'm out feeding the cows and one cow shows up, I'm going to feed that one cow." So the preacher says, "Okay." So he gets up there and he goes after it. And he tells the whole sermon. And an hour later, he ends with a thunderstorm and everything. And he's so excited about that. And he's all done. And then he comes back to the guy at the end. He says, "Well, how was it for you?" And the old rancher looked at him and says, "Well, that was really good. But even though I have one cow, I feed that cow. I don't give them enough for the whole herd." So anyway, we have a small crowd, so we'll go through some things faster and be happy to go through some things I had saved for tonight and go from there. All right, a fun thing I wanted to start out with tonight was the 4 kinds of dates. The 4 kinds of dates is something I share with a lot of couples. For one, it's important to go out on dates. The research shows that the best of the best marriages go on a date every week. I cannot claim that I do that every week. I do strive to do that, and I attempt to do that, at least with the intention. We do get out a couple times a month. Life gets in the way and busy many times, so to do an official date is difficult. But that also depends on your phase of life, on how easy it is to go out on a date or not. And if you have young kids, that makes it more difficult. I think the older you get, the easier it is. And then sometimes you think, well, it's like we're together every night, all the time. So what's so special about going on a date when we're already doing everything together anyway? And that's where I bring in the 4 kinds of dates, because I think it helps add a lot of variety and spice to the time together. So, and some couples I get, they do go out. And so the routine is they go to dinner, they go to dinner, they go to dinner, or they go to dinner and a movie, dinner and a movie, or they alternate that. That's the big variety. And sometimes they end up going to the same restaurant every time, which is okay if that's really what they want. Nothing wrong if that's satisfying and happy. But as human beings, one of the 4 basic needs that we all have is some variety. And so the 4 kinds of dates looks like this. I usually turn to the husband and say, "Okay, the first date, you're in charge of planning the date to set up. If you have kids, you're in charge, you're responsible for getting the babysitter. Now, maybe you don't know how to do that, and so it's okay to get your wife's help with that. But you're responsible to do that. Just like when you first met, your job is to plan and set up and strategize a date that you think that your wife would have fun doing with you. And so your whole intent is to bring fun and to focus on her and making it a fun night with her. And so that changes patterns for some couples. For some couples, that might be the same all the way for that. Well, that's the first date. Second date is the same, except opposite. So this time it's the wife's responsibility to plan the date and plan for everything that you think he would like. So that makes that fun to be able to take turns doing that. Date number 3 is he plans the date selfishly, something that he wants to do that he thinks would be fun for himself. And his wife's job is to come along and be good company and be a good sport. And that's easy for her to do because she knows the next date is her turn. So she plans something on date number 4 that she wants to do selfishly. And his job is to be a good sport and to be supporting and to keep good company. So that adds a lot of variety with the different kinds of dates. That serves psychologically, emotionally, that serves a lot of purpose because in many relationships, it might be a little out of balance, and that helps balance the relationship. And usually in a couple, it's always the same when planning and planning and planning, and that person's already tired of planning. And so by taking turns, you each get a chance to do that. And for the person that's always planning, they get a break at least half the time. And they can have the fun of the date without having had to plan at all. They just go along for the ride. So it works really well for that. And so that's a lot of good variety. Now, since this is focused on marriages and it's Valentine's week, for those of you who are together, you can use the same principle when it comes to your activities in the bedroom on who's in charge, who plans, and where your focus is at. So you can take the same 4 perspectives on dates or in your activities in the bedroom. So that adds variety and gets out of a lot of times the routine of things. So that's your 4 kinds of dates. And so whether you're going out later tonight or tomorrow or Monday after Valentine's, then you can start that process and have fun with that to have variety. All right, well, those are the 4 kinds of dates. So have fun with that. And so once again, I invite anyone with questions to put those in the chat below. If you have any questions, I will address those. So I'm going to go on a little side note here because I had someone email today. So I'm going to take opportunity to answer those questions. Okay, so some of the challenging questions, well, some of the challenges we have in relationship, a couple questions about how to do that, whether it's with our spouse or with our children. The first night I talked about the bad wolf, good wolf. So in relation to that, one of the questions that comes in, and this is actually not an uncommon question I get in my office from spouses and from parents, is what do you do with a spouse or a child that seems to be stuck in the bad wolf mode or seems to be there more than the good wolf? And so with that question, the first thing that comes to my mind is, well, what's going on with that person? Why are they stuck in a bad wolf, which means in survival mode? So my mind first goes to physical comfort. So usually if a person's in pain with back pain, constant chronic back pain or sciatica or headaches or things like that, when we're in pain, we go into survival mode. We shrink into ourselves and we become very selfish. And so it's difficult to think outside of ourselves when we are in pain. We're trying to survive, trying to just get by. And so That's the first thing, is what's going on there. What can we do to minimize physical pain? Along with physical pain, a person could be tired. If it's a brief period of time, then we usually understand, oh, this person is tired, or this child is tired, or my spouse is tired. Maybe we just need to get some extra rest and then we'll be better tomorrow, if it's one of those things. If it's a more chronic thing, then I also ask about diet. What are you eating? How are you sleeping? That's a big question. I ask everyone that comes in as well, is, are you sleeping well? And then we go into sleep etiquette in ways to improve your sleep. And so if someone's not getting very good sleep, then they're not going to be in the best of moods. Okay. So if they're getting sleep, if they're not in specific physical pain because of back pain or something like that, then another part, well, part of the diet is, what are they eating? Are they getting some vitamins? Some vitamins that help feed the brain. You think about a car is not going to go very far without gas or without oil. It's going to come to a grinding halt. And so in today's society, we cannot get all the full nutrition you need for our diets, even if we only ate fruits and vegetables out of the grocery store. We will not get all the minerals that we need for the function of our body. So we need to supplement, have some good vitamins to supplement. Okay, and I know of some children who, when they were given some special vitamins, their behavior toned down and they became the sweet child that they were once known as. And so a lot of diet has to do with that. A lot of times today with ADD, there's the red dye and yellow dye and different things in food. There's allergies, and there's a lot of allergies that cause a lot of discomfort, that cause an individual to be in emotional pain and not necessarily in a good mood. Okay, so let's just rule out now if it's not diet, it's not pain, this person has a bad attitude, then that's where it comes in, setting up boundaries. And a good book for that is called Boundaries. I just was talking to a couple earlier today, and they have a challenge with having boundaries. They seem to be very trying to please everyone, and because of that, they get exhausted. They can't do everything that everyone demands for them. And so I've been working with them on boundaries to be able to learn to say no, learn to set boundaries, learn to redirect the expectations. Sometimes they want to do some things, but not the whole thing. And so it's learning to redirect that. Okay, so that's part of setting boundaries and learning to establish that. If you feel like you're being held hostage, you are. And so that's part of setting boundaries, is to get yourself out of that position of being held hostage by that individual or the children. If you have a child or a spouse that seems to be very committed because of personality things, where they seem to be committed, that if they're not happy, they don't want anybody happy around them, that's where it comes to getting better boundaries. And I suggested that you get some professional help to sort through that. I do have couples that come in. Well, usually where it comes up the most is when I only have one part of the couple come in. And oftentimes the spouse, everyone's heard of the term narcissistic, but oftentimes their spouse really is narcissistic, not just acting that way temporarily. So you have to work on setting boundaries, doing baby steps, and doing it more gentle and more slowly if you have a mental disorder. So it's good to be able to have a timeout. Okay, another part of that is, question is, how do you know how much is based on your own level of expectations versus the other person truly being selfish or negative? So it's like, how do you know, am I being selfish? Am I being unfair? Am I expecting too much? And that question is difficult to answer because every couple has their different balance and different level and different agreements on how the relationship is working. An important part of that is what I talked about the other night when we talked about change. That third element of change is support. So if you really have a challenge with another individual where you're doubting your expectations, if it's too much or too little, it's good to get outside perspective and outside support to be able to evaluate that. I can't tell you how many times I get couples in my office, and when they share their story, I thought, oh, well, that's normal, that's common, and that's okay for you to expect that. That's healthy. You need to ask for that. You need to expect that. And so that's a way to balance a relationship. And so it's good to get outside support for that, because oftentimes someone who's in that mode is going to be pretty persistent, and it's going to wear you out. And after a time, even though at first you may not have believed it, it's easy to get worn out and to start believing what they're telling you, even though it really is not the truth, or it's not even healthy in that way. So that's where it's good to have outside support and perspective. So as I mentioned, a good book for that is Boundaries. That's one of the main books every couple needs, every individual needs, where they feel like things are out of balance for that. Another perspective, that's something I shared with a couple earlier today, is about what Harville Hendricks called container days. And that's the principle of taking turns to support each other, to get what you need or what you want, to be able to make sure that it's not always one way. The other night I shared about if you give up, that's the lose-lose, and you go for the win-win. And that's, if you go into the segment win-win, then you can see the details of that. But container days, when taking turns, that's something actually that started in the beginning of my marriage, almost 35 years ago, where we knew we were going to have a family of faith. And in that, we, as a couple, we pray together every day. And as sharing that responsibility, sharing that role, and who leads the prayer, when we have prayer together as a couple, we take turns. And so the way we remember to take turns is when we kneel down and say, oh, what's the date? Well, the date today is like the 12th. And so, oh, okay, that's your turn, my wife's turn. So every day that's an even day is her day to say the prayer. Every day that's odd, I say the prayer. Well, that goes into other things as well. If we both go to bed and the light's still on and the light switches across the room, well, whose day is it? It's the 12th. So that means it's the day my wife goes and turns the light off. And that way I can sit there without guilt, letting her have a turn to turn the switch off, knowing that if it's an odd day, then I get up and I turn the light out. Or if the dog's barking, who's going to check on the dog? Well, that one's always me. So it depends on what you have in agreement that you're going to take turns on. If we're going to watch a movie, who picks the movie, who makes the popcorn, so you can kind of divide up that way. If you're going out to eat just randomly, well, who chooses what restaurant, or who has the larger say on that choice? And so we take turns going back and forth on that by choosing out which day it is. So the question to verify was, what's the Boundary book? It's Henry Cloud. That is the right author. It started in 1981, I believe. I don't remember exactly, but it's had 12 or 14 editions and updates. And so it's still a good book. And if you're allergic to the Bible, maybe there's something else, because he shares a lot of scripture in that book. All right.
Can I just say something on that odd even thing?
Yes, please do. Thank you.
So we've done that odd even thing for many years, but if you stick with one thing, like you say, I'm odds, she's evens. The person who's odds always gets extra days. So we switch every year, but I'm always the same as the year. So if it's an even year, I'm evens. If it's an odd year, I'm odds.
Okay.
So that way we switch every year, but I always know that I'm the same as the year, so we don't get confused on where we are.
Okay. So
That makes it fair, if you need
So-
fair.
2021. So it's your year to be odd. Is that right?
That's right. Yep.
Okay. Well, that's great.
So I get all the extra days this year if there's a 31 and then a 1, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
And next year he'll get them.
Yeah. So as far as the reason I'm always on odd is because I'm choosing to be more responsible, because actually on the odd days, it's my day to give service.
Okay.
So in a way, she's okay with it not being even. So
Well, whatever works for you, but that's how we do it. So
yeah, so I appreciate that. I appreciate you sharing that. And one thing before a lot of others, I think it would be awesome if you shared what's coming up for you.
oh, our 50th anniversary is this year.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So congratulations, 50
Thank you.
years coming up. I am in the process. If I get it ever done, I'm only about 6 interviews into 50, but I have been working on and off for 10 years already because I haven't had a consistent schedule with that of interviewing couples who have been married 50 years and putting in summaries. So there'll be each chapter for each couple on what it takes to have a successful, happy, long-lasting marriage.
Okay. Well,
So-
if we actually make it to 50, which will be in August, you
Okay.
can talk to us then.
All right, we'll do that. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for sharing. So the container days, you can, and what's brought up there really is figure out what works for the two of you. And that goes back to the win-win. What are you both happy with in the outcome? And you arrange that. So that's awesome. All right. I'm going to transition into a whole nother thing. Okay, so some of the questions that comes up sometimes as I get my whiteboard up here, I get that, I have to do a few settings here. One of the challenges with all of us as we grow and mature is we come to life where we do the inventory with ourselves. Are we doing well? Am I achieving my goals that I have? Is my relationship what I wanted it to be, or imagined it to be, or is it getting better and becoming that? Whether we do that consciously or subconsciously, it's something that everyone goes through. What's commonly known oftentimes in the community is when someone's behavior changes dramatically. And so they say, oh, they're going through a midlife crisis. And sometimes that's because a person says, well, I've been doing this routine so much, it's time to do something different. It's time to try different things. And that's a great time for exploration. It's also a very vulnerable and dangerous time for the marriage relationship. And obviously that becomes very difficult in some other circumstances. Statistically, a lot of times that's when affairs happen, and we want to learn to avoid those, obviously. But that's when it comes up, is when someone reaches midlife crisis. And so I get the question oftentimes, how does that happen? Why does that happen? How come? I didn't know they were capable of doing this behavior. And so I'm talking about extremes here, but yet it's a challenge that many come across, and all of us, at least in a little bit, in some form. And so the way I explain that many patients have related to is to understand how our memory works and how our character development works. So one of the things I remember in grade school was how to figure out how old a tree is. If you remember that from grade school, I remember in first grade, and for whatever reason, it's still a thing with me. When I'm on a hike out in the forest and we go past a tree that's cut off, I like to look at the rings of a tree and count those and find out how old the tree is. Now, one of the things also when it comes to forestry is if the rings are very close together, then you know that there was not as much rainfall that year because the tree didn't grow as much. So like right here is a less precipitation that year, and this year before would have been a lot of precipitation. So you can even count back the years and know what years had a lot of rain and those who had a little bit of rain. Okay, now using that analogy is, as a hypnotherapist, I know that everything that we experience in our whole life is part of our being, part of our subconscious. It's in our body, the memories, the experiences we have, all of that. So I'll just take a round number of being 50. If we're 50 years old, then everything from being born to 50 is part of being 50 years old. So say like right here at 25, that's halfway. Okay. So now down here when we're 1 year old in the very center. Okay. So as we grow up through life, we have different experiences that become traumatic. Okay. One thing I mentioned before was that who we are as adults is formed 95% by the time we're 13 years old. So there's a lot of trauma that happens before we're 13. Some of that is external and some of that is just our perception of things as our brain grows and we develop. I remember one time when I was young, well, maybe I don't remember well, but there was a time, I think I was around 7 or something, and I was waiting for a ride. Now, to a 7-year-old, being left behind at a park, waiting for your ride to show up, it feels like the eternity. And so in that time, I felt very lonely and I felt abandoned, and it was very scary. And probably it was only 10 minutes before my ride came to bring me home. But for a young child, that's a lot. And so some of it is not necessarily on purpose, but it happens. So we have these things in our life that cause trauma. Of course, there's other things happen to us that cause trauma. So I bring that all up to just talk about that's how part of our system. So when we meet someone and we get to know them, so this is a lot rougher. Okay, so when we get to when we first get to meet them, even before we're 50, like around 20, we begin to get into each other's life. The longer we're together, the deeper we get into knowing each other. And that's part of why when we first get married, there's not a whole lot of trauma in this space there. But as we get together longer and longer, we go into and we trigger those traumas that are there. And that's why we have difficulties in relationship. And coming back to the difficulties, it's back to that 95% of the problems your spouse has with you is from their childhood. And the problems they have with you is from your childhood. And because we trigger on each other, and those are opportunities to bring healing and support to each other. And that's why the communication exercise I shared the other night is a great way to talk about things and to work through the anger and the frustration, the hurt and the sadness, and bring the healing, the appreciation and the love and the support. And as we do that, then there's the healing. And so those things go away. My mind here is going other directions. A note there. Okay, so now with this foundation, this is like a top view. And so if we take a side view, if this is the conscious mind right here, and this is the subconscious mind, and I'm being very generous with the conscious. Psychologists say, when I was in high school, they said, well, we don't even know 5%. Now they don't say we don't even know 1% of what's really going on. And so there's a lot going on in our subconscious mind. Anyway, as we grow and develop, we could say that we talked about the bad wolf, good wolf. And so we could say, here's the bad wolf and here's the good wolf. And the one that you feed grows more, bigger. And if you starve the other one, it gets smaller. Okay. But the reality is, I know that as a hypnotherapist, we don't just have a bad wolf and a good wolf. Because of trauma, that gets split in half, and we might have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of each, the good wolf and the bad wolf. And so with our spouse, okay, so there's each of these different ego states are different parts of our personality. Now, normally it's all combined into what we present and who we are, but sometimes we might be kind of different when we go to church, or different when we go to work, or different at home with our spouse. And so those are different ego states. Now, one way to understand that is in a way to imagine multiple personality. In hypnosis, each of these ego states can present as a different personality. We don't notice it because we are more integrated, okay? But what happens in a marriage, when we first meet somebody, we connect and we think, oh, I like that part about that person. Oh, I like that part. Oh, I like that part. And we begin to connect, and then we decide, hey, overall, this is a good person, and I can live the rest of my life with them. Okay, so we grow together, and as we get into different traumas, then there's other ego states that then get involved, and we learn more about our spouse, more about the different thoughts and feelings and perceptions, and the perspectives on different things. So let's take that out. If someone isn't staying focused and committed on the relationship, what can happen, and does happen with couples at times, where let's say this person, they have this ego states that's not connected, those are not connected over here. And so they meet somebody at the office or at the sports club, and this part of them connects there and connects there or here. And they think, oh, this is more fun. My partner here, over here, that's not part of their personality. And so that's how a person gets sidetracked with someone else. So it's important to eliminate that connections. When you feel your partner is not fulfilling all of their needs, all of your needs, which actually no partner really can. It is not, it's just not how we're made. So it's learning to let go of certain expectations, okay? So, for example, one of the things when I was in high school, I said to myself, you're gonna find somebody that is very musically inclined and plays the piano really well, because I love the piano. I love listening to the piano. And so I meet this beautiful woman, and she doesn't play the piano. Well, I fall in love with her anyway, and we get married. So she can play a few things. She's pretty good at chopsticks, and she can actually play a little bit more than that. But so one thing I had to do was grieve the loss of that idea that my spouse is not going to be able to play the piano. So the alternatives is I find other ways to enjoy the piano. I can listen to that on the radio, you know, and I can practice the piano myself and enjoy the piano myself. It's been nice. I have children learning the piano and playing the piano, so I get fulfillment that way. But learning to just know that that's not something my wife's going to be really good at. She has many other wonderful talents and does well, but that was a big adjustment that I had to let go of that expectation of in being happy and satisfied with my spouse. Okay, so I hope this makes sense there. So when you have a part that you haven't connected with your spouse, and actually some of these ego states might not even like your spouse, and vice versa. There are things about our spouse that we may not really like. We can love them, and there's obviously, usually it's a two-way street. And so that's the goal of learning and respecting and just being kind, because over time, as we are kind, then those boundaries soften and we learn to appreciate and love our spouse for who they are rather than who we want them to be. And so as we learn to love them for who they are, it's actually beautiful to see more and more of who they are, and the things that you wanted that they don't have become a non-issue, or they actually develop that trait. So again, that's a lifelong work. Before most of you signed up, I was having a conversation and it came up, how long, what's the longest a couple that has been married that you have counseled? And my answer was 68 years. I had a couple come in that had been married for 68 years. And it says, you think? Why do they need counseling at that age? Well, at 92, the husband retired off the ranch. He'd worked up to 92, and now he was home all the time, underfoot. She wasn't used to him being in the house all the time. And he was sitting there on the couch, bossing her around like she was one of the ranch hands. And she'd been managing the household for that long, and says, I don't need your instructions. So we were able to help them make that transition to being together more and to give more respect to space and setting those boundaries. And so we accomplished that, I think, in 3 or 4 sessions. So when they drew the new boundary lines and they had an understanding of that with each other, then they were able to get along fine with that. All right. It's been great to have you here. It's been a good time to share these things. I have more tomorrow night to share. And I have lots to share. And as I'm doing this, I'm realizing I'm not going to cover half of what I wanted to this week. So I'm determining, now I don't have my schedule opened up yet, but very soon, probably by March, I'll be starting this. So I guess that will be the plan by March, is I will be starting a Marriage Mondays, and I will be doing this for a lunchtime, probably at 1 o'clock on Mondays. So right now, the plan will be I'll work toward that in March. So you can be invited to tune into that. So you've been a great audience, and I wish you to have an enjoyable Friday night. And the night is still young, so you can go have a good date. All right. So for those who, I will be here again tomorrow night, and then we'll start in March doing the Marriage Mondays. So thanks for being here. And remember the 4 kinds of dates. Lots of fun to see y'all.